I'm never beating the allegations at this point. I'm just letting
You're
you
never
know.
beating them.
Betting no allegations for sure. Anyways, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast, and we are back again as we discuss all things the Arsenal. Alex, George, how are we doing?
Very well, sir. Very well. How are you?
I'm all good.
You woke up at 1:30 today?
Woke up at a good time. No, listen, I didn't wake up at 1:30. Do not accuse me of such a thing. You know, this is what Alex does now. You know what I mean? It's heinous crimes. You know, I wake up at good times, 6 a.m. in the morning, go for a run. You know, hit the gym after that. What time does the Rock Johnson wake up at? 4 a.m. Grinding in pound. That's what I do.
You're there at 3:30. Would you run through the listeners for your sort of normal daily routine? Because I find this really incredible.
So I sleep, I breathe.
Yes.
I eat.
At what times?
I walk. At times, whatever time it feels right. Yeah, I go for my gut feeling.
The gut
If my
feeling.
gut says 4 a.m. is the time to wake up, I wake up at 4. If my gut says 4 p.m., I wake up at 4 p.m.
Do you
I've
guys
got
have like a UK inspired like motivational influencer? Like we've got like David Goggins, who's like a super
We've
famous.
taken David Goggins. We've got Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson. We don't really have an equivalent of
No, we
David
probably
Goggins.
do. We got someone. We've definitely got someone. Come on, there's got Mikel Arteta.
Stephen Bartlett, maybe?
Who's Stephen Bartlett?
Why does everyone hate Stephen Bartlett at the minute? I've missed this.
Is that a podcast guy?
Yeah, he's the Diary of a CEO guy. I feel like
I don't know why they hate him.
everyone's
I don't know.
getting
I
angry
don't
at him for. I don't know why. I've
Must
missed
be
it.
reasons there anyways. But anyways, guys, let's change this drastically and talk about Arsenal youngsters. Right. David Ornstein's spoken, Alex, and he's talked about the fact that Arsenal are changing their youth policy and are now going to go for the best youngsters, and there's a budget in place there as well. And we're of course going for, is it Bradley Clark as well, a youngster who is of good standard as well. So I'm not asking you about the
Braden
player.
Clark, actually.
Braid, whatever you want to say, right? All the same. But talking about that policy itself, do you see why Arsenal want to make a change? Because the academy itself has produced some really good players, but clearly Arsenal think they can improve.
Yeah, so this is from Ornstein on the Athletic Football Podcast the other day. He said Arsenal are preparing to spend quite heavily on youth players this summer for the first time in a long time. There's a budget, it's worth a listen to hear Ornstein talk about it. He talks about Arsenal's whole kind of approach to the summer and so on and so forth. It's a good listen after the Cannon Pod, please. Look, I'm resisting the urge to say I told you so. If we go back to the conversations that we were having, what I was saying the whole time was there's a problem either way, right? And I'll come to define what I mean by a problem in a second. There's either a problem of Arteta's integration of players, because for a club of our stature and size and our culture, if we compare ourselves in our youth system with, if we're looking at other clubs that we want to be like, or the sort of the mainstays of that sort of Cobham and the Ajax Academy and La Masia and stuff, and the places we want to get to in terms of how much money we can save ourselves, the culture, the club that we're trying to be, a handful of debuts in nearly half a decade isn't enough. So there is a problem. It doesn't have to be the biggest problem in the world. The most important thing at a football club is winning matches. So if we never gave an academy graduate a debut ever again, but we won Premier Leagues and Champions Leagues, you wouldn't catch me complaining. But if we're trying to find competitive advantages, Man City, through their academy work, have found Phil Foden, have found Rico Lewis, have found Oscar Bob, all these sorts of things. So you can save yourself a lot of money, and it's a competitive advantage. In the same way, why wouldn't you go out there and get a set piece coach? It's just another aspect of football that is worth having a look at. So my point was always that we have either one of two issues to maximise that part of our club, right? Either the integration from Mikel, or it's the talent. And it sounds like the club have said, actually, it's the talent, and that's absolutely fine, But I think, yeah, I remember those conversations sort of post PSV away, people saying, it's the club won't care about it. Why do you care? But it is important. It's a way of maximizing things.
But don't you think there could be like another problem in a sense where maybe it's not that we aren't producing talent, it's that everybody around us is fighting to buy different talent? Like when you're talking about like the approach, it is quite outdated. Like you look at the top 6 clubs, by the way, they've all had budgets far before Arsenal. They've all had budgets that they're starting to go and buy people. Like you even mentioned Oscar Bob within there. He's an example of this exact strategy. Like he didn't come through the lowly ranks of Manchester City. Mm-hmm. He moved to Manchester City in 2019 from a Norwegian club for an undisclosed fee at like 16, and then was developed up to be 20. So like the mentality in terms of, and that was one of those players, by the way, that have actually made it to a title challenging team. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about problems. I do think that because of the competitive nature of the Premier League and the talent that is out there, the kind of almost commercial aspect of youth development is getting lower and lower and lower. You look at Endrick, you look at Estevio, by the way, these are 16-year-old kids from Brazil. You know, Endrick went for what did he go for to Madrid? 60 million pounds at 16. Like it's the scope, I guess what I'm trying to come across at is maybe it's not that the youth talent we're producing isn't good enough. It's that the entire marketplace is shifting. The entire marketplace for talent is actually getting lower, not higher.
And there's a lot of examples of that, you know, Garnacho and so on. Whichever way you skin the cat, we needed to change our approach. Do you see what I mean? Like, you know, and that was my point all along. Whichever way you look at it, and I think it's really encouraging. Look, I imagine this would have been a sort of a point on Mikel Arteta's phase list at some point. You know, at some point we have to start looking at ourselves and going, can we maximize every single aspect of the club? Every single facet of the club. Can we get the most juice out of that orange? And it's great to hear that that's what's going on. I also think it's the right time for us. You know, we're beginning to establish ourselves on the pitch as one of the most dominant clubs in the world in terms of our football ability. So then how do we back that up? How do we make sure we're serious in every other aspect? And that means maximizing the stadium. And we've seen, you know, all the changes at the stadium and, you know, even down to the wraps and, you know, how things work and the ticket systems, which are all going through overhauls and having problems and being fixed and so on and so forth. We're looking at, you know, our staff members and the academy and every single aspect of the club all feeds into that match day experience and us trying to get the 3 points on a Saturday or a Sunday. So, you know, I think it's great news. And as George was kind of alluding to, we have been behind in that aspect. And I think it can only be a good thing for the future.
It definitely can, and it's exciting. So, go on, George. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, because we have to also talk about the main
youngsters and George. Take it away.
Well, we can't not talk about the guy that's going to be heading this youth revolution, which is maybe something that, you know, David Ornstein didn't quite talk about, which was Phil Cohen. We poached a really talented, kind of heavy scout from Rangers recently, and he's begun work as the academy kind of chief. And so we got him in October, I believe, of 2023, went on like a gardening leave, but he is in charge as of the winter. And so he's the one that's going to be heading up this new kind of youth revolution about who is going to come to the Arsenal Academy. And he's been really well documented from Rangers as having like a really great resume. I'm not going to pretend to be the most in the know about him as a person, but, you know, his last role at Ibrox got tons of different talents, and I think that, you know, he came with a lot of expectation really in terms of trying to revolutionize the academy setup in terms of talents that we might buy. So anybody that you see is coming up from his head, and he'll probably be working with Lee Heron, our already kind of resident youth talent scout as well. But together it seems like you know, Phil Cohen's going to be the one that's masterminding the who in terms of the buys that we do get. So I'm interested to see what we do. Like you guys have mentioned, we got Braden Clark from Wolves, center back, which I will just end on this. I think that the youth focus in terms of positions, I would love to see some defenders. I would love to see, you know, I don't think that Arsenal or Hale End in general have had a great history of that. So I think I can always trust us to produce a striker, a winger, a dribbly central midfielder. Those are things that I feel like we produce at will. But I think what could be interesting is trying to head up this academy kind of gap, right, with profiles that you don't typically create. For example, I look at Cobham and I think not just right backs, but I think defenders, they really produce quite a bit of defenders, generally speaking, that are ready for the top level. You know, you look at Livermento, you look at Chalobah, you look at Reece James, you know, Ian Matson, Mark Gahey, Tomori. There's a long list of really top level defenders that they're able to produce, and that's a key. But, you know, I think that's maybe a gap that we could look to improve on.
No, we definitely can. And, you know, the Arsenal Academy is evolving, but we've also got some very exciting youngsters that we've always talked about, Wanyeri, Miles Skelly, and so many others. So I'll ask you guys a very specific question. We always talk about the amount of youngsters that Arsenal have, but looking at our current first team and the players we have available, going into the future, which of those youngsters, whoever it may be, do you think are going to actually break into the first team next? Like, give me an exact name that you predict. We'll go to Alex first.
I think it's hard to look past Wanyeri. I think the way if you look at him in his cameos, the way he takes the ball. I don't know if you saw that clip of him. I think they were doing some kind of exercise in training where he was keeping the ball in the air, and he just looks so technically secure, so clean in the way he takes the ball and the way he receives in pockets. He looks really smart in his movement. He doesn't ride too early or too late, and I think that sort of that bridge to get into academy football. I think for because he's technically there, the physical side will come. And I don't worry about him physically. I think he's already pretty robust. He seems like he's got a pretty low sense of gravity. He looks pretty sharp and pretty clean. And then the decision making and all those sort of the high level stuff and tactics and so on will be layered on top. So I think if you're asking yourself questions of a footballer and you're going, well, what do you need to get to the top level? Talent, check. Physicality, check. Technicality, check. The question mark is maybe the brain, but from the little flashes we've seen of him stepping into the first team, I have no questions about his brain. Even just those sort of 5-10 minutes he played against West Ham, if you just watch his movement, he knows where to stand. He knows when to come high. He knows when to drop deep a little bit, and also the trust as well. This is something I think we've discussed before. Look how many times someone offered him the ball. Look how many times Martin Odegaard passed to him. Look how many times he was trusted with the ball. Oftentimes you'll see academy players come on and they're bypassed, and he wasn't. And I think I think there's also. There was something about the players whispering to Mikel and saying, we want Wanyeri to come on. They were sort of saying, put Wanyeri on. That tells you everything you need to know. You know when professional first team footballers are looking at a 16-year-old and saying, we think he can help us at 16 years of age. We think he's going to make our jobs easier. Because I think we kind of forget about this. Someone like let's say a Ben White or a Martin Odegaard, why would you want someone like a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old in your team? You'd only want them there if you feel like they're not going to be a drag. Yes, you might like the mentorship aspect of it. You might like the aspect of it of feeling, the club culture or whatever. But in the end, you want someone who's going to help you to win. You want someone who's going to come in and be useful and give you something you don't have. So all of the signs and the sort of whisperings, literally, that we hear about Wanyeri, I think it's hard to look past him.
Mm-hmm. Definitely is. And of course, George, we've got your boy Miles, we've got Real Waters, we've got a few other players that, could potentially break into the first team next. But is it as simple as either Wanyeri, maybe your boy Miles?
Like I've talked about Miles so much on the show, I feel like it would be a cop-out to do that. So I'll try to be inventive. I'll try to give people a new name that might be coming up. And he's come to training quite a bit for the Arsenal first team, and it's Aid in Heaven. I still think he's a ways away. He's certainly not as ready as Miles and Ethan are at this level. But, the Arsenal Academy has been trying to maybe work him exclusively as a center back or a left back right now. But he's predominantly kind of a free 8 midfielder typically. And the reason that they're putting him so deep is because he does struggle with kind of defensive instincts and defensive awareness. And so they are working much in the same way that Arsene Wenger used to put, central midfielders out on the wing to gain a little bit more understanding about angles. I think the Arsenal Academy is putting him deeper in those defensive phases to improve those defensive instincts. But as a whole, I think he's a really interesting profile. Another kind of left-footed, tall, rangy midfielder that's got brilliant running power, great dribbling technique, and has got a really good creative passing range. I think he's a little bit more of a carrier than he is of a passer. So you might be hearing a lot of similarities to Miles Lewis Skelly, but he's not as physical. I think he's a little bit more creative and with less defensive instincts. I mean, if you had to draw comparisons, again, you get killed for this, but you're looking at a Paul Pogba type, kind of that free 8, who doesn't love the defensive responsibility, but has the frame that you sit there and you really question, why don't you get involved out of possession? Because you really should be. So
you're saying he's as good as Paul Pogba is today? That's what you're saying?
Mate, like football manager, sign the kid up. He is your guy to lead you to the promised land.
He's called heaven.
Well, he's a slice of heaven, some might say. And it's a talent that I think that will come a little bit more to the fore. And if he can develop himself as a center back and increase his versatility a little bit more, it increases his chance of being integrated into the first team. I think when you look at the next talents to break through, quote unquote, you're going to find not just are they the best talents that come through, but they're also kind of the most versatile in a sense, because positional football asks so many different roles of you. You look at Ben White and you look at what he has transitioned from, by the way, since coming in from Brighton. It's actually incredible. Like when you look through center back, the different right back roles, now the inverted role, there isn't a position that he hasn't played down that right hand side, really. And so I think that you're going to have a similar level of expectancy from a youth player, that you can no longer just be specific into a particular role. You're going to have to be able to fill in at different areas. You even look at Miles Lewis-Skelly, who's had kind of sample at left back. So yeah, I think that's going to be the new way forward. So look out for Aiden Heaven.
Okay, well, a few names there. There's one that's not been mentioned so far, and he's thriving out on loan at Sturm Graz in Austria. Mika Biereth is making headlines, and I had a recent interview where he's spoken about, him being like Erling Haaland in a sense, where he doesn't care about touches, he cares about scoring goals, and he's scoring quite a few goals this year. First, of course, on loan in the SPL, and now in Austria as well. So, Alex, let's talk Mika Biereth. Now, I'm not sure if you know too much about the player, but talking about Arsenal youngsters and, players that have gone out there and done well out on loan. You've got the example of Saliba, who can break into the first team, but then you've got the example following Balogun. Where do you think Biereth will fit into that? Will he be a player that can break into the first team squad, or is it as simple as a sale?
I haven't seen enough of him to majorly comment. So George can talk about the player himself. From what I have seen, he's not quite the profile that I think we're missing from our front line. I think we made that clear on this podcast a number of times, in terms of someone who can move centre backs in a different way, run channels, create separation in the box, all that sort of stuff. Look, maybe he develops into it. I do feel with strikers it's a slightly different thing, and I think sometimes you can have a centre back who's basically cooked when they come out of the academy. I think they need to refine certain things about their game. But you look at the likes of Saliba, you look at Konate coming through when he came through. Obviously a lot of players come through later on, but I think there's George, you're on mute.
Jared Braithwaite to a lesser extent.
Yeah. So I think that because I don't know, there's just some degree to which it feels to me like some defenders can get away with sort of stepping out of the academy and jumping straight into the first team. And I think strikers, it takes a little bit longer. I mean, in the end, it is the hardest thing to do in football. So I think it takes time. We look at the likes of Harry Kane. He's had to go out on loan and so on and so forth. George can speak more to the profile, but I think I also want to say that proper use of the academy can look like someone going out on loan to Sturm Graz, doing well, and selling him on. I think sometimes it's almost seen as a failure if someone goes out on loan, they do really well, they don't quite get into the first team because they're not exactly the profile we need. It may well be that Mika Biereth, 3 years ago, is the exact profile that we need because, in another timeline we don't have this player or that player, and he comes in and he does really well. And that's a good use of the academy as well. But I almost think visualizing what do we want from our academy? And I think sometimes people think it's either you come into the first team and you make 300 appearances or you've failed. And I find that just a completely bizarre way of looking at things. So if Mika Biereth can come out, go out on loan to Sturm Graz, come back, we sell him on for 10, 15 million or whatever, that's a massive success story.
I agree. And I think in terms of the player himself, George, I think you spoke about him in the past and said did you compare him, I think, to Dusan Vlahovic, I'm pretty sure, in a similar mode. And I think he's one of those strikers he's more of a goal scorer than he is like a player. As he said himself, he wants to get involved and, link up play and stuff.
Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. To hear the full episode, sign up as a YouTube member on this channel or go to patreon.com/thecannonpod.